Hello, hello. Welcome back, my forever people and my new people who are just watching this video. Today, we are going to dive right into words that you can use with your PIMI family. I've been asked to do this video by people who are specifically concerned about spouses and really close family members. A lot of these techniques are not going to work so well if you're being hardcore shunned, but if you're not, this video is for you. As a recap for the first video, I don't know if you get to watch that or not. I'll make sure I put the link in the comment section. We talked about prepping the ground and lowering your husband, wife, parents' defenses by love. You know, love hopes all things, endureth all things. Love never fails. And we're going to use that. Us apostates, we have this reputation of being cranky, angry, miserable, horrible, bitter people. And by showing love, an incredible amount of loving kindness to them, we actually lower their defenses. If they're constantly afraid that we're going to be going, what about the governing body and what about 1914 and Australian Royal Commission and all that kind of stuff, their walls are already up. If you've prepped the ground by showing an incredible amount of love, you've not only helped yourself in the healing journey because you're stepping back into love versus the resentment and the other things that we feel when we're coming out, and you're also prepping them. So let's get into the first method that we're going to use here for effectively reasoning with our loved ones. But right before we dig into that, I'm going to ask for a small favor. Could you pretty please leave a comment? That helps the YouTube algorithm so that the rest of our apostate XJW family can find these videos. There are tons of people just like you out there who are asking these same questions. And I would love to be able to grow this channel so that tons of our brothers and sisters out there can dig into this information too. That would be super awesome if you could like, share, subscribe. If you're part of any other Facebook groups, post these videos. I'm making them just for you guys, okay? All right, so the first method that we're going to dig into is the Socratic Method. We already know how to do this because we are trained preachers. We've been doing this in field service since our very first presentation, actually. When we would go up to the householder, we would usually say something super cheesy like, world situation is super horrible. How do you think it will end? Or, what do you think is the solution? And there is a very good reason why we asked questions. When you directly attack or present information, or even if it's not in the attacking form, when you present information without prepping the brain first, you hit another firewall. Even if you've come with the love and you've prepped the ground first, when you come head on to something, they will reject it. It's kind of like you can't see the forest for the trees. They have their own confirmation bias. So no matter how logical you approach it, showing them the Australian Royal Commission or talking about changes of the governing body, all of those things head on, you are going to meet resistance. It is going to roll right off of them like water off of a duck. They've been trained to resist that. Any publication that you look at that talks about, how to handle apostates, it's an immediate shut the door. So since they've been trained for that, we have to approach this a whole lot differently using the methods that we've already been trained to use. The reason why questions are so effective, it's because that is how a person changes their beliefs. If you think about when you first started waking up, your brain also followed this process. It kind of goes like this. Okay, so you have this belief. Your belief is this solid core belief. You cannot go from a solid core belief to new belief. There are steps that have to be followed in between. So you have your current belief. You cannot even go from current belief to new information because that new information will not sink in. That's why, like I said, showing them proof, belief to proof doesn't sink in. The first step to being able to help somebody accept new or different information is an emotional state of openness and questioning and wonder. When you first started waking up, you almost 100% probably did that too. You were very firm in your beliefs. And then there became a moment in time where your brain went, huh, hmm, I wonder. And it's in that open state of mind that information bypasses the mental firewall. So you have the belief. The next step is that wondering, questioning phase, that, then the mind is open enough to be able to accept new information and then eventually come to that new belief. And questions are the way that you open this feeling. So I've got some questions prepared right here. Here are some words that start causing the brain to immediately enter into this more open-minded state. These we call question stems, so you can finish these any way you want. It's things like, I was thinking about some of the new changes. The way that is phrased automatically causes their brain to also think about some of the new changes. Help me understand. That is a great one, because instead of putting them in attack mode, it literally puts them into explaining a complicated situation or something that just quite literally doesn't make sense. Help me understand why the change on beards. Does God change? Questions, 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 questions. The third question stem, what would happen if? If is your gateway word. Circle that word. If. What if is the most fantastic question. It forces you to see an extra scenario. What would happen if, let's see, what would happen if people questioned beards? What would happen if they made a radical change again? What would happen if is one of my favorites for opening up the mind to new possibilities and new ideas. This one's a great one too. It also includes the word if. How would we know if they made a mistake? How would we know if Jehovah agrees? How would we know if all the brothers agree? How about this one? How would we even know if anyone else is questioning? Notice what those questions do to your head, and you're already woken up. Okay, so got some more words for you here. We've got we've got another if word here. Here we are with our questions again. Okay, ready? If the governing body made a mistake about something, how would we know? How would we find out? What's the difference between being humble and gullible? Or, maybe we could change that to something like blind faith. What's the difference between being humble and following blindly? Christendom, we say that they follow blindly. How would we know if we weren't doing the same thing? Using scriptural texts, scriptural examples is a really good idea because it connects something that they already firmly believe in with an open-minded question. So how do we copy the example of the Bereans and thoroughly and investigate these things to make sure they're true? How do we balance respecting authority with following biblical examples? Ah, notice how these are not very attacky. And it's also not really what they're expecting us to say either, you know. I'm sure they've probably heard some of your other questions before. You know, maybe if you've talked to your loved ones before, you've already brought up the Australian Royal Commission, you know, maybe the two witness rule or something like that. Maybe you've already brought those up, so they'll be expecting those. But by encouraging their mind to use critical thinking, this is critically important to helping somebody wake up. You know, something else to keep in mind too is even though we used questions when we were preaching, Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, we had like zero critical reasoning skills, zero. So using these questions really helps them be able to develop intellectual exploration. So it might take a minute. Remember, love is patient. You are planting seeds. You are not waking them up instantly. You are planting seeds. So here is a few questions on information control. So why do you think the organization discourages reading older literature? Maybe you could even find a specific example of something that's been deleted. I went to look for this information on jw.org and they don't have it in the library. I wonder why. Do you have any ideas? What would happen if we compared what the organization teaches 20 years taught 20 years ago with today? You know, I keep up with a lot of the current publications because I talk to a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And the difference between Watchtower articles today and those from, you know, even 15 years ago, they have dumbed it down so much. I mean, I kind of felt like in the 90s, you know, maybe even the 2000s, we actually had something to study, something that we could dig into or at least pretend to. But they've changed that ridiculously. And bringing that to their attention can be something that says, you know, aren't we supposed to, didn't Paul say we're supposed to get into the meat of the scriptures? Does it seem to you that maybe this is getting simpler, like milk for a baby, instead of getting deeper? Where are the deep things so that we can deepen our knowledge? Questions, questions, questions. Here's some questions on shunning. How do you think Jesus would handle family members who left the faith? How did Jesus handle sinners? I'm pretty sure that Jesus said to even love your enemy, right? How about this one? What's the difference between discipline and punishment? We're helping them develop critical reasoning skills here. Here's another one on shunning. How about something like this? Wow. Can you imagine somebody who hasn't spoken to their family for 20 years? If you put yourself in their shoes, how do you think they feel after randomly hearing from somebody after not hearing from them for 20 years? I'm wondering if maybe it makes them mad. You know, they're being taught, the JWs are being taught that this is a loving provision. Do they feel loved, do you think? Thought-provoking questions that we're going to be asking. Maybe you can come up with some more questions of your own. These are some that I just kind of came up with quickly as kind of an example. I can I could do more videos on more words that we can use if you'd like. For the next video, stay tuned for the next video because I'm going to be covering don't, what you should absolutely not do, mistakes that we're making. Please, 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 please help our brothers and sisters, our apostate brothers and sisters, find this video with a like and a comment. And as always, please leave your comments because I am looking for what you want me to talk about. I can sit here and talk about all kinds of stuff, but if it's not what you want, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So leave me some comments and I will be bringing you part 3, which is some of the mistakes that we're making, coming up next. All right. Talk to you guys soon.